everyone. It's my pleasure today to welcome a great panel of experts on China and India relations. From India, we have Professor Swaran Singh and Dr. Henhua from China, and Ambassador Shahid Masroor Gul Kiani from Pakistan, and Syed Muhammad Ali, also from Pakistan. I welcome once again all the participants for sparing time from their busy schedule, and your presence is indeed important, and it's indeed an honor for IRS. So Professor Swaran Singh and Dr. Han Hua are amongst the oldest friends of IRS and have been very kind enough to accept the IRS invitation whenever we extend to them. So thank you very much. And thank you, Nabila Jaffer, for bringing Dr. Hankwa to this webinar. And dear participants, today's discussion is on emerging trends in Sino-India relations and its implication for this region. The format is very simple. Each speaker will be speaking on the subject for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session. Coming to the topic, why we have selected this theme, the very reason was to envision the impact of new trajectories of bilateral relations of China and India on South Asia. So there was a time when there was a discussion mainly focused on India and Pakistan as the two major players in South Asia. Their bilateral and multilateral relationships significantly shaped the conflict and the cooperation culture of the South Asia. But now, what we can see, we can witness, there are many factors and actors have been added to that, such as the rise of China and the US-China competition, China-India border issues, Russia's active role in the region, especially in the post-US withdrawal, China's strategic cooperation with Pakistan and Iran, India's presence in the Quad, and also more recently in the so-called Middle Eastern Quad and the Western expectation from India. And then Russia's relation with India. All these factors are reshaping the China-India relation, which are of immense importance to the region's traditional geostrategic and geo-economic culture. Historically, we have been seeing many ups and downs in India and China relations. For instance, we have seen from Chini Hindi Bhai Bhai to 1962 war, the Tula and Chula clashes in 67, Tolangla incident in 75, near face off at border village of Damchok in 2014, and Doklam in 2017, and more recently the Galman Valley incident. So one interesting thing is that both countries did not allow those incidents to ever overshadowing the pragmatism prevail in their bilateral relationship. So nevertheless, today's environment, especially after US withdrawal, I do not say that the new great game has begun, but Sino-India relationship is potentially altering the bilateral relationship of South Asian countries. So with that, I request Professor Swaran Singh to shed some light on the emerging trends and enlighten the audience where the Sino-India relations are heading towards. So before giving floor to the Professor Swaran Singh, I just want to briefly introduce the speaker to the audience. Dr. Swaran Singh is a professor for diplomacy and disarmament at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is the president of Association of Asia Scholars and General Secretary of Indian Association of Asia and Pacific Studies. He has been the guest speaker at Research Institute of Indian Ocean Economies, Yan'an University of Finance and Economics, China, and advisory board member of Atlanta-based Communities Without Borders, United States. He is formerly visiting professor at Australian National University, Australia, at Sciencepo University of Peace, Fudan, Xiamen Universities, Shanghai Institute of International Studies, and Center for Asian Studies, Hong Kong, in China, and Asia Center in the University of Philippines, Ansho, Hiroshima, and Kyoto Universities in Japan, and also guest faculty at Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Sweden. With that introduction, I just hand over this floor to Professor Swaran Singh. Please.
Thank you, Imran. I thought alphabetically, both in terms of China and India, or between Hanhua and Swaran Singh, it should be Professor Hanhua to speak first, but I follow your instructions and I will try to make opening remarks for about 15 minutes, as you mentioned. I'm delighted to see that Ambassador Nadeem Riaz also is with us, is president of IRS. Of course, I'm delighted to be on panel with Ambassador Kiani, Dr. Syed Ali, and of course, my very old friend, Professor Hanhua. We first met in 1999 in Honolulu in Hawaii. And it's a long-term knowing each other over a period of time. And I've always appreciated her indulgence with the South Asian studies and India studies, despite her major responsibilities also being arms control and disarmament. So I'm delighted to be on this panel. Thank you to the IRS team for organizing this. Let me quickly use my 15 minutes to underline first thing. There's so much coming out, particularly in last 2 years, about the tensions between China and India. There is no doubt it's a difficult time or chapter for China-India relations. But simultaneously, so much is being overlooked, which is positive. And I want to quickly enumerate a few things. The most recent statistics that have come out of from Beijing, because their financial year runs from January to December, is that for 2021, China-India trade has come back and become, the largest trade of India around the world. Briefly, for 2020, United States had become the largest. And the rise of trade has been about 44% over last year, reaching $125 billion. This is along with the tensions that are continuing, and so also Chinese investments. About different estimates show between 26 to $50 billion over a period of time, particularly infrastructure, e-commerce, etc., etc. So there is simultaneously something nice which have also been happening positive in bilateral relationship. Again, when it comes to pandemic, I think the whole world, as Ambassador Kiani was just mentioning before we started, is suffering. It's a human tragedy in that sense. Has also highlighted some of the positive linkages between China and India. For example, India's medicines that were supposed to be cured, or at least the treatment, if not cure, before the vaccines arrived. And I'm talking of hydroxychloroquine or paracetamol, also came in light, but it also brought to knowledge that, the APIs, the ingredients that go into making of that medicine, between 70 to 90% come from China. It also brought to light how about 24,000 Indian students are studying in China, of which 21,000 are learning medicine in China. So something which is simultaneously moving forward as positive linkages between two countries is perhaps sometimes not really highlighted, which I think needs to also be understood. Second, when it comes to how has China-India equations impacted South Asia, the most visible, again, narratives talk about the Belt and Road Initiative of China leading to sudden increase of China's investments in South Asia. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor being on the lead in that sense. But I also want to underline how this whole beautiful vision of BRI has come out of China's compulsions. Excess of foreign exchange, excess of factories churning out material, excess of youth coming out of universities seeking employment. So to me, it's not as much out of ambitions, as much out of compulsions that BRI has gone out and invested in what we very often consider to be conflict zones, to be not stable regions, not areas where per dollar returns can be attractive to Chinese. So in that sense, one has to understand that China's engagement with South Asia in terms of investments is not driven to deal with India, but it's a phenomenon worldwide. China is investing in all parts of the world, including in South Asia. So therefore, I wouldn't like to see it as exclusively aimed at India or undermining India's influence in South Asia. That is a byproduct, that India feels concerned about China's increasing footprint and influence in South Asia. Third thing I need to underline also is how most of the South Asian countries have engaged China, primarily in terms of hedging against India. Given the fact that most of South Asian countries other than India are very small compared to India. In fact, until Afghanistan joined SAARC, none of the other SAARC members had any common borders between each other but with India. So something that in IR theory we call small state syndrome is understandable, that they have concerns about India being inordinately large, big economy, influential player. And therefore, the primary driver for South Asia's engagement with China has been a strategy of hedging and seeking some kind of balancing between, not being vulnerable to India in that sense. And now it comes to the pandemic and immediate period, because I have just 15 minutes to talk about. Again, in pandemic, I think Nepal was the only exception where the ratcheting up of rhetoric from particularly from one leader, KP Sharma Oli, was coinciding with the tensions on border between China and India. And there were insinuations, therefore, that perhaps this was done in consideration of either pleasing Beijing or in terms of taking advantage of tensions between China and India during that time. But that period also was a limited span of time, and it is over now. There's a change of leadership in Nepal, and the rhetoric has more or less disappeared. To some extent, Maldives could be another example, where you saw that in 2018, for example, President Yamin had unusually closer cooperation with China. A lot of investments were coming at that time. Sudden change in Maldives was a matter of concern for India. But India decided to only use political and diplomatic engagement to seek balance. And even when the constitutional crisis happened in 2018 under Yamin government, and finally the election happened, Mohammad Soleh came to power, and India, of course, took advantage and extended about $500 million of aid to the new government there. So there was no possibility of, again, some kind of a peacekeeping operation. You would remember earlier examples of India's peacekeeping operations in Maldives. It did not happen, and then situation was handled very differently. Sri Lanka is another example. In 2008, Rajapaksa was very close to Beijing, but when he came back to power again in 2019, it's a relatively more subtle, nuanced, calibrated, balanced relationship between how Sri Lanka has sought to engage both India and China in this context. So what I'm underlining is that there is a constant learning happening in South Asian countries as to how to engage China and how to deal with that enormous incentive of Belt and Road Initiative projects, which many of these countries have begun to realize are not really as fascinating as they appeared to begin with. Now, the last example in terms of that hedging strategy I would like to give from Pakistan. Pakistan is apparently, at least in India, believed to be the most allied ally of China. And of course, CPEC is a big example of Belt and Road Initiative taking place. But interesting it is that despite, sort of certain freeze in India-Pakistan dialogue, there was no negative sign or negative indication from Pakistan during these India-China tensions. Pakistan did not try to take an advantage of that situation. Indeed, in middle of that situation, in February last year, 25th February last year, India and Pakistan recommitted themselves to the ceasefire on line of actual control, which is an excellent reflection of a very pragmatic, balanced approach to how to behave in case of tensions on border between China and India. And indeed, another step, beautiful, Pakistan is today cooperating with India to ensure India's humanitarian aid can go all the way to Afghanistan, and trying to sort of make sure that it is not really pushing Taliban into taking too many anti-India positions or some things like that. So fundamentally, a far more pragmatic approach is evolving among South Asian countries as to how to ensure their engagement remains balanced between their engagement with China and their engagement with India. And they do not seek to undertake some kind of unusual advantages when it comes to tensions on border between China and India. Now, I'm not so sure when it comes to Beijing. I'm more sure about the South Asian neighbors. And despite so much positive happening in Beijing and New Delhi or India-China relations that I underlined to begin with, apparently the skepticism or trust deficit between Beijing and New Delhi has showcased. For example, when last year, India saw a spike during the second wave of a pandemic, India had to naturally stop exporting its vaccines, which it was exporting around the world, including to neighbors, for example, to Bangladesh, even to Bhutan. Bhutan is the closest country for India in South Asia. And therefore, they naturally approached the other possible sources and vaccines, for example, to Bhutan came from United States, from European Union, and also China. Now, in that context, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi initiated a China South Asia initiative, which was very interesting because in that initiative, it was called China and South Asia Initiative, just like China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, but it involves regions which are in dispute between India and Pakistan. So India's problem is why it is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Likewise here, Wang Yi's dialogue was called China-South Asia Dialogue. And indeed, it involved most of the countries of South Asia, other than Maldives, Bhutan, and India. So out of 8, 5 countries did engage China in that dialogue. And that dialogue resulted in creation of China-South Asia countries emergency supplies reserve, which is for medicines, but also poverty alleviation and cooperative development center in Chongqing in China. Now, in that, I saw that India was not really kind of seriously engaged. And when you want to call it China-South Asia Initiative, perhaps engagement of India was kind of anticipated to be part and parcel of that engagement. And from there, I want to say that because China and India are world's largest populations, and of course, strongest economies, at least in purchasing power parity, China is the largest economy, India is third largest economy on the planet. In that sense, their bilateral trust deficit then has reflections beyond their bilateral relationship. It begins to make both sides overreact, not just in South Asia, but in other contexts. For example, it would have implications for Indian Ocean region. Of course, Indian Ocean region has also seen Chinese and Indian navies cooperating, patrolling in Gulf of Aden, even rescuing a particular ship under stress from pirates. But it does create certain implications, geopolitical implications for Indian Ocean, even for Indo-Pacific. I would say it would create certain implications as to how India sees itself engaging with Eurasia, how India sees itself engaging with, for example, Far East or Indo-Pacific. In that sense, what I'm underlining is that this trust deficit has implications not just in South Asia, but beyond South Asia. For instance, my friends in China, for example, very often insinuate motives into how India and Japan are working together. Whether they are working together in building infrastructure in India, or they are building Asia-Africa growth corridor, or they are kind of collaborating in quadrilateral security dialogue, it does generate perhaps little unexpected responses and analysis from China. And I would agree that maybe Chinese see that India also has similar biases and analysis, which my friend Professor Hanhua might like to underline. And let me close by saying two things that we need to really, or two or three things that we need to really focused, because IRS is a policy think tank and it always looks at where should we move forward, not just look at problem, but look at solutions. I think first thing is to make sure somehow a very beautiful arrangement of informal summit meetings that had started between China and India can be brought back into action. I'm not sure how and when and who will help us doing that. I understand lately President Vladimir Putin has been taking certain interest in at least starting Russia, India, China trilateral summit meetings, which will bring Indian Prime Minister and Chinese President face to face. But some kind of that very innovative framework of informal summits had led to some beautiful decisions. Immediately relevant for South Asia in that sense is something that in April of 2018, in Wuhan, President Xi Jinping had proposed and Indian Prime Minister had accepted something called 2+1 model, which meant that China and India as equal partners will go and work with third countries. And the first initiative they had jointly taken in same year in August was training Afghan diplomats in Indian Foreign Services Institution here in Delhi. And likewise, there was then people writing articles and op-eds that next country could be maybe Sri Lanka, where India, China could work together and initiate some joint projects in that. So that informal kind of setting between two very, very ambitious, very powerful leaders had led to certain kind of out-of-box solutions. Likewise, I think we need to think of some breakthrough in India-Pakistan relationship, because Pakistan is the most important country other than India in South Asia. And very often India-Pakistan equations have impact on the larger region itself and how both Pakistan and India engage the other countries in the region. My hope is that this inordinate challenge of Taliban 2.0 and the humanitarian crisis which are evolving in Afghanistan right now, in which case Pakistan is the most influential and critical player. Any solutions for Pakistan would involve, any solutions in Afghanistan would involve Pakistan for sure. And this new beginning of Pakistan and India coordinating in humanitarian aid of India going to Afghanistan could be a possibility. And I could be as ambitious to say that, this breakthrough these are things which is where I think some bold initiatives would be required to make sure that both India and China become the positive locomotives for development of entire South Asia, rather than, being seen as an either or option for South Asian neighbors. They should not look at China and India as a choice that they have to choose one of the two. They can choose both India and China, and India and China can both work together in development of South Asia, because they bring very different things to the table. And China can bring turnkey projects of very, very heavy duty, large size. India can be, much better in training people, in educating people, in sort of building kind of projects which are also equally interesting and commercially viable projects compared to China, for example, because they are mega projects. So both can bring their own advantages to bring development to South Asia. And that kind of possibility is what we should look forward to. To me, that's difficult, but it's not impossible. And I think certain openings and cracks like India, Pakistan working together in providing humanitarian aid to Afghanistan could be seen as an opening. So foot in the door is something that I'm indicating, and we could move forward from there. I'm looking forward to my other co-panelists also making their comments, and also if there are any questions at the end of our formal presentations. With that, I hand it back to Dr. Imran Sardar.
So thank you very much, Professor Swaran Singh, that you have highlighted many positive things, and also you have suggested that there is an opportunity in Afghanistan as the situation, humanitarian situation is going on, in which obviously the Pakistan is just having a hand in it, and there is a possibility that Pakistan and India can cooperate in that situation. So I totally agree with you. Without further ado, I will just move on to the next speaker, so that we can the things that you have raised. There are many questions, so I will try my best to just get more questions, and then we can have a very healthy discussion that. So our next panelist is Dr. Han Hua. Let me introduce Han Hua to the audience. That She is a professor and director of the Center for Arms Control and Disarmament at the School of International Studies, Peking University, China. Hanhua has been a visiting researcher at the School of International Affairs, Georgia Institute of Technology, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Sweden, the Stimson Center, the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Washington, D.C., and Monterey, Victoria University, Canada, and the Peace and Conflict Institute, Uppsala University, Sweden. She has also written extensively on arms control, non-proliferation, and South Asia for journals and newspapers in China and abroad. With this introduction, I hand over the floor to Dr. Hanhua. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank for inviting me to participate the important discussion. And thank you for the sponsor, the Institute of Regional Studies, Pakistan. It's my really great pleasure to speak out from Chinese perspective about the Sino-Indian relations and the impact of this relationship in South Asia as a whole. First, let me start my presentation by saying that when they talk about the Sino-Indian relations, in recent years, I read through different publications in different parts of the world, but the first impression maybe is not really great to say, but the popular and striking discourse in recent literature, specifically in Western literature on Sino-Indian relations, is rivalry. I read through different reports and articles, different kind of rivalries occur to me: regional rivalry, serious and enduring rivalry, rivalry in globalization age, rivalry in the ocean, Indian Ocean, and rivalry in the 21st century. So different kinds of rivalry. But for me, I have a little bit different opinion on that, because especially in Chinese literature, scholars as well as policy practitioners tend to use serious difficulties and low able for the current Sino-Indian relations rather than rivalry or enemy or adversaries. So that's first one I want to emphasize. Is for me, rivalry is too far away from the current reality of the Sino-Indian relations. And especially when they talk about the difference between the Chinese per se Indian China relations rather than maybe others. But as Dr. Singh just mentioned, some good signs have already observed among the scholars and practitioners. For example, after the 14th round of military commanders negotiation on the border issue, the joint statement, even without a final settlement, but the message from the joint statement sends a positive message rather than a bad, discouraging message. So I think the overall Sino-Indian relation is still complex and not rivalry. Having said that, I have to admit the current Sino-Indian relations do encounter some serious difficulties. For example, as Swaran Singh has mentioned, some of them. But for me, first one is a geopolitical dimension has emerged in the complexity of Sino-Indian relations as power shift in the world in general, in Asia in particular, continued. The US has taken more confrontational approach toward China. Moody's strategic alignment with the United States make Sino-Indian relations more complicated than before. A second difficulty is the China's BRA and CPEC make India, some Indians be suspicious on China's increasing influence more economically though in South Asia and the Indian Ocean rim. Indians' opposition of BRI and the countermeasures deepen some the already exists the deficit of mutual trust between Beijing and New Delhi, just mentioned, Dr. Singh just mentioned. And third difficulty is the erosion of consensus. Both sides are determined to keep tranquility along the border and to prevent the border clash from becoming a flashpoint of conflict between the two countries. After the Dockland, the two leaders had tried to reset the relationship, but Govan and the Bangun River deadly clash last year again brought the relationship back to the downward trend. But at the same time, I still think the bilateral relations has some the good way to describe. For example, just as Dr. Singh just mentioned, the trade relationship between these two countries, even though the relationship as a whole has experienced the low ebb, but the economic context and the trade has continued to strengthen. For example, last year, the trade has already passed up to 100 billion US dollars. It's the first time, actually. Even the boycotts in India really make the Chinese some investment and some economic activities in India and met some difficulties, but still the trade relationship has increased significantly. And secondly, I think the common positions taken by Beijing and New Delhi in some of the international political, economic, and financial orders. For example, the climate change last year, I think Beijing and New Delhi took similar positions in the final document. Let me move on to the impacts on South Asia, the current relationship between China and India. I think I have to say the impacts include good sides and bad sides. The good sides include, for example, the increase in economic engagement of China has brought some opportunities to integrate China into South Asia as a whole. I think if the integration happens, I think the broader South Asia, maybe greater South Asia region will be a very important integrated part of a whole Euro-Asia continent or connectivity or the very dynamic economic planet. I think that's one of the impact if it's successfully unfolded. Second one is the countries in this region, I think can choose between, big powers in this region, India, but now more China's interest or economic interest in this region really make the smaller countries and also Pakistan have more choices rather than only rely on or depend on India. For decades, I think the countries in this region really, some of them, they have no other choices, especially in terms of economy. And I think China's rise, if they use that word, really make some opportunities for the South Asian countries to really engage in economically with a country like China. More investment they can get, and the more, joint ventures they can establish with China. But I know some people talk about the trap or the debt trap, like Sri Lanka is experience. Some people blame China for this this crisis, but as a whole, I think in general, the China's more economic influence and political influence really gave the countries in this region more opportunity. But at the same time, I have to admit some not very encouraging impact on this region because of the some intensified competition between China and India. For example, the economic stability in, for example, Nepal and Sri Lanka and other region, other nations. So maybe because the competition, some economic opportunities, but politically, the disability, the change of the different governments happened more frequently than before. It's sad to see that, but maybe that means more cooperation rather than competition should be between China and India. So let me conclude my presentation by saying that I really take optimism view on the relationship between China and South Asia regions. I mean, China has already had a very good weathered partnership with Pakistan, and the CPEC they still think is a flagship part of the China overall BRI. And if this the projects are complete in the near future, I think the connectivity with China, between China and Pakistan, and far beyond these two states, really can make Pakistan more integrated in the China's connectivity projects. And actually, I think Pakistan will be the pivot state in Euro-Asia, the joint connectivity. Let me stop here, and I'm looking forward to some criticism and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hedwa. You have really raised very important points, and the trade obviously is there, and it is very smooth despite the irritants between India and China. And the perception of the death trap or suspicion is more grave than the reality. So here the Chinese have to work on. And now I move towards the third panelist, and I am switching to Shahid Kiani to Syed Ali because he has to leave. So my apologies, Shahid Kiani sir. I just wanted to switch to Syed Ali. Syed Muhammad Ali is the Director, Strategic Defense, Security and Policy. And he is a well-known international policy analyst, and he has rich experience of high-level multilateral and bilateral negotiation on strategic, nuclear and security issues with the US, China, and India. His work is on foreign security, nuclear and energy policy has been published and quoted in world's leading think tanks such as the Brookings Institute, CSIS, IISS and RUSI. With this brief introduction, I just hand over the floor to Syed Muhammad Ali.
Thank you so much, Sardar Sahab, and my sincere gratitude to Institute of Regional Studies. I think one of the most illustrious, well-respected think tanks of Pakistan, and particularly to its leadership, Ambassador Riaz. I have fond memories when he was in Italy. I had the honor of being hosted by him when I was part of the Bilateral dialogue. Sir, thank you for having me. I think it's a great honor to be part of such a formidable panel. I'll try to be brief and focused. I think this is a very timely initiative by Institute of Regional Studies, and the topic is very interesting. And I think my appreciation for the selection of panelists as well. Let me quickly make a brief comments on what has earlier been said. I think it's a very positive discourse which has happened thus far. And I really appreciate the points made by Professor Swaran Singh and also Professor Hanhua. And actually, let me reiterate and acknowledge to begin with, before I give my own perspective, that for a Pakistani strategic thinker, I think it is a positive sign that both leading Indian and Chinese experts and scholars see and recognize positive signs in the bilateral relationship between China and India. I think this is a positive sign. And I really appreciate the points made by Professor Swaran Singh as well. And in particular, I'm going to contextualize what has been said earlier, that my central argument in this brief presentation would be that the points made by Professor Swaran Singh and also by Professor Hanhua actually prove that the international perception and particularly the Western concern regarding a very important relationship in Asian region and continent between India and China is interpreted incorrectly. It is seen with more concern than perhaps it deserves. I think the attention and the interest, considering the size, the geography, the potential, the economy, the population, is perfectly understandable. China and India represent the two largest countries in the world in terms of population. So it makes sense that the whole world is very interested in the nature, the trend, the direction, and the content of their bilateral relationship. However, the recent trends that Professor Saran Singh and Professor Hanhua mentioned indicate a positive trajectory, which is different from the expectations and the strategic interests of the Western powers. Because the US expectation that India can be built up as a bulwark, to help the containment of China project. Perhaps let me mention not just what Professor Saran Singh said, but also a very astute and respectable Indian experts, strategists like Mr. Menon and others have also, and Raja Mohan have been mentioning that perhaps India needs to assess to what degree it wants to commit to the US strategic project of containing China, and whether it is in India's own interest at all or not. Because as a realist, I would expect Indian leadership and strategic thinkers and astute scholars to be primarily interested in preserving and promoting India's own interest rather than being used by any other power, which may not be in its long-term own interest. And in this context, let me briefly frame my talk into three aspects. When I look at the Sino-India relationship, there is a geopolitical context, there is a geoeconomic context, and there is a geostrategic context. And what does this mean for South Asia, and in particular for Pakistan? And briefly put, I think geopolitically, we see a growing cooperation and convergence at international forums between New Delhi and Washington, which I believe must be seen with concern in Beijing. However,
I think we lost him, Imran.
Okay, so I think we move forward. The point that Syed Muhammad Ali has raised is very important, and I think that Professor Swaran Singh is the right person to answer that. What is?
Can you hear me?
We were just moving forward. So I thought
actually, can you allow me to? I think the moderator needs to allow me to open my video.
Sir, wait a second.
Okay, he's allowing you.
I need the permission to allow to start my video again from the moderator.
He's allowing you.
Now you can, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll be brief. Actually, there was a phone call. I'm on the phone. So what I was saying was that geopolitically, there are two dimensions that deserve assessment. First is, obviously, there is a growing and consistent convergence between US and India. The 2+2 track, and the build-up of Quad, and other bilateral strategic convergences. However, I have yet to see, and I'll seek clarification and correction from my Chinese friend, I have not yet seen India directly confronting China on any global issue at a multilateral forum. So what I'm trying to say is, although India is becoming close to the US in order to gain a greater international recognition, status, membership of international organizations, particularly the strategic export control regimes, and also it has secured US support as part of its case for the permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. So this is a consistent trend. However, I do not see a direct and consistent Indian attempt to challenge or contest Chinese interests at global multilateral forums. So that means that India is using its relationship with Washington to gain status, to gain technology, to gain power, to help in its own national interest of rising as a power. But it is still conscious of its own interest that it does not need to be seen as a hostile neighbor immediately by China. And I noticed that the Chinese expert used the term concern for India rather than a threat. That choice of vocabulary is important. In terms of geoeconomics, I think a very important point made by Professor Swaran Singh, and let me put it into context, that when India has developed its bilateral economic relationship with China as perhaps its most important long-term regional economic relationship, both countries have a long-term stake in expanding their bilateral markets. And when India is developing China and China is developing India as a very large bilateral market, the extent of economic interdependence, and that is my central argument in terms of geoeconomics, is almost similar to the extent or scale of Indian economic relations with the US. So what I'm saying is, the geoeconomic domain, India has an astute approach of balancing its geoeconomic relations with the US and with China. It is not, it is actually increasing its bilateral economic interdependence with China. And it is not reducing its economic interdependence with China. And that can work in future as a against any escalation, hostility, and disincentivizing kinetic or military crisis. Now let me come to the geostrategic aspect of this bilateral relationship, which is the most popular or oft discussed. Here, I think India has been really astute, and it has used the unipolar moment immediately after the breakup of Soviet Union to build close relationship with the US and offering it, ally against. And in this attempt, it has really been successful in attracting a lot of technology, a lot of defense equipment, the Indo-US nuclear deal, and also becoming a member for 3 of the 4 strategic export control regimes with the US help. The only strategic export control regime of which India is not now a member is the Nuclear Suppliers Group, for which the US is also supporting it consistently and proactively. With its help, India has become a member of Australia Group, of Wassenaar Arrangement, and also Missile Technology Export Control Regime. And the US support for its buildup of defense industry, the interoperability, the exercises, and so India has become a number of the complex global chain as well. So we see this military and geostrategic convergences expanding and growing consistently. But let me come to the real meat of this brief talk. What does for South Asia and how Pakistan and this region look at it? I think that is the most part, because strategic partnership has allowed India to absorb technology, cutting-edge systems, and also the US has been tolerant towards India's somewhat ambitious and aggressive strategic behavior towards Pakistan. And we witnessed that in case of Obama 3 years ago, that perhaps a more restraining and balancing role from Washington would have been, helped timely manage the crisis. There is a growing concern in Pakistan that the growing strategic convergences and cooperation between Washington and New Delhi reduces Washington's ability to be as a balancer, as an honest power broker, and as a effective crisis manager in polarized South Asian environment. Because US has been consistently saying it expects and it views maintenance of strategic stability in South Asia as a long-term US own interest. But the Indo-US strategic convergence has reduced visibly, substantively reduced US ability to be seen in Pakistan in particular as a honest power broker, as a crisis manager, and it is seen as its views Indian ambitions and aggressive approach towards Pakistan more sympathetically, and so that is also Pakistan, the growing Indian influence in the US. It is interpreted, it has translated to influence on the US policy and coercive approach, particularly towards FATF as well. So we see that this Indo-US convergence is translating into an economic of Pakistan. So that is a serious concern in Pakistan. And lastly, I think most important, strategic buildup of India, the growth and expansion of the fissile material program, also the improvement in its strategic vehicles, including ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, as well as the recent acquisition of the ballistic system, include particularly S-400 and the negotiation in case of 500 as well, are seen as are seen with a lot of concern, skepticism in Pakistan, and are seen as stabilizing trends for the strategic stability of this region. So to lastly, basically, we in Pakistan expect China. If China expects to rise and to be accepted to the region and the world as a player which is not just prosperity, but also stability and peace in different regions. I think there is a growing expectation in Pakistan that China needs to also translate its into influence in the multilateral institution and to place a role in terms of managing of different crises, conflict resolution initiatives. And there is a lot of expectation in Pakistan that China's economic rise needs to be translated and exhibited in terms of a proportionate role in terms of international issues, in terms of international, in terms of also protecting and promoting its own interests in terms of international diplomacy. Also, last point is that in case of Pakistan, the expectation is that the lasting peace and stability in South Asia is primarily, it hinges on 3 points. The resumption of dialogue with a meaningful, constructive, result-oriented, with the help of international community, with not the US, but also China and other major powers, to help, not just manage the crises, but also resolve, particularly the core issue. Secondly, we expect international community to in terms of their own cooperation with India, consider the implication for strategic stability, and also, ensure some sort of balance in terms of the arms sales. And lastly, urge both India and Pakistan to exhibit and exercise strategic restraint. Because this is in the interest of the international community, this is the common interest of the international powers, including the status quo powers and the emerging powers, and this also augments their own interests in maintaining lasting peace and security in this region and ensuring security of their investment, whether it is in India or whether it is. So with those few words, I really thank you for this time and inviting me at this first forum. I apologize because I had a really urgent commitment that I'll have leave shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Syed Mohammad Risa. You have raised very important point, and I just said earlier that 2 points are very important, which I would like Professor Swaran Singh to please respond to that in the question and answer session. One is that what is India's position in the Quad, or what are the Indian position, India's own narrative? What is India's own narrative in that? And secondly, the trade deficit between China and India could be potentially be a problematic. So I would like the Hanhua to just respond to that question in the question and answer session. So now we move towards the last panelist, Ambassador Shahid Kiani Sahab. Let me briefly introduce. Ambassador Shahid Masroor Gul Kiani has served in the Foreign Service of Pakistan for more than 3 decades. In various high-ranking positions, including the Additional Foreign Secretary, Ambassador to Vietnam, Ambassador to Laos, and High Commissioner of Malaysia. He has also been part of various Pakistan missions, including Bangladesh, Canada, Nigeria, and United Kingdom. Ambassador Kiani holds MA in Political Science from London School of Economics and Political Science, and MA in Diplomatic Studies in International Law from the United Kingdom. With this brief introduction, I just hand over the floor to Shahid Kiani Sahab. Welcome, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Imran Sardar. I'm really grateful to the Institute of Regional Studies for having invited me to this very important forum. Just let me give me one second, sir. Just 1 second. I'm moving this tray.
Taking this opportunity, I would like the participant to please type in their question. We are not relying to just use the mic because of some inconvenience in the past.
So first of all, thank you very much. I would like to thank the Institute of Regional Studies, the president and the members of the institute. I would like to just briefly state what my comments. I think I'll leave the comments at the end of what Professor Swaran Singh has said, Mr. Wan, Ms. Hua, and the last participant. It is a very, very important subject because people ask, why focus in China and India? Meaning, why? But the reason is that even a cursory look at the Asian geographical map will reflect China and India jutting out as 2 huge states, hedged in the massively large canvas of numerous small and medium states. Now, the thing is the tyranny of geography. If you look at the geography, these 2 countries have a huge border, the commonality of the border. So the significance of coexistence is so important that these 2 states will have to live together. And as Professor Swaran Singh was saying, that the President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have held a series of discussions both in China and India. What were they trying to do? Meaning, if you allow me, I'm not what you call an expert on this region, but if you look at during the Cold War, what was happening? The Soviet Union and the United States used to sit together in the height of tension. Right after the 1962, what you call Cuban Missile Crisis, they understood that they have to understand each other, sit down together across the table, because being nuclear power countries, nuclear armed countries, they had to understand each other and try to, mitigate any force move from other countries. So China and India have done whatever it was possible to sit down together. But the thing is, I would not agree with one of my participants who said that they are not rivals. They are rivals. Rivalry cannot be, believe it or not, can be managed, contained. But that's 2 rivalries of these 2 huge countries because of the way these two countries have emerged on the map. You have revolutionary China and India coming out of the colonial grip. So these two countries have their own, the way they have emerged, and they are rivals. Both have huge economies, both have huge, armed forces. But my opinion is that these two countries will try to reduce as much as possible the armed conflict. What has happened in the China-India, what you call in the Ladakh standoff, what does it show? I'm just going to put together Pakistan-India relations also. The Damocles swords on China and India is the significance of the border has not been demarcated. This is something which I sometimes not able to understand. A stalwart like Prime Minister Nehru was a stalwart of the anti-colonial movement, a very leader of the non-aligned movement also, was unable to understand the importance of that the China will not compromise on the sovereignty of the border. So they should have, and they carried on this the negotiations of the border. While Pakistan, within a few months after the discussion had initiated between China and Pakistan, we were able to sign the border. Now we have a relationship of trust, but unfortunately, China and India have a relationship of what you call mistrust, and this will keep on happening. The Damocles sword of the undemarcated border. And here, Pakistan, India, the Damocles sword is the Kashmir issue, which has not been resolved. So these two countries, and now, as Professor Swaran Singh was rightly saying, that the trade has more or less increased. But I would once think say, sir, this is okay. Maybe the common man is impacted by the trade; he's getting cheap goods in the market. But to a very sane element within these two countries, Pakistan and China and India, as long as the tension is there for China and India, the border demarcation is a Damocles sword. They have to look at it, focus on it as soon as possible. Otherwise, you'll keep on having the Ladakh standoff. You'll have another one. Earlier you had the Doklam. This will continue to be there. And so is with Pakistan and Pakistan and India. If you look at the military and political leadership in Pakistan, the Islamabad dialogue and now the continuing the ceasefire, these are good beginnings on which a trust can be developed between, or not trust, rather an understanding can be developed. You see the composite dialogue between Pakistan and India should be restarted once again. Behind the scene, they should be working. My own opinion is that Pakistan and India should upgrade the relationship, should send their high commissioners to each other's country so that the message is sent to the highest level. Now coming back to China and India, now what is the problem? Problem is if the United States is pushing India to contain China, it's not going to work. Neither economically, neither in the defense realm. You have seen what happened in the standoff. This is a lesson. What happened with Pakistan, I'll just give you the post-Pulwama. The Indian got a very embarrassing response from Pakistan. So defense, the armed conflict is not the way these two countries should be working. So what is now in future? The thing is, these initiatives by United States, the Quad and other things, what does it do? It does create, concern within China and its leadership at what is India doing. So I agree with the last part of me saying that India does not do anything which creates problem for China in the multilateral forum. But in the end, what does it do? Trade, increase in trade, good, because this is the significance of the tyranny of geography of the coexistence is okay. But as long as this serious issue of border demarcation is not focused, these things will keep on happening. Now, as far as now India raises concerns like CPAC. Now, CPAC is a peaceful initiative of China. What is BRI? Now, I'm sometimes surprised that United States and other countries raising concerns about BRI. Now, BRI is China's response to a peaceful development globally. It is connecting the whole world. I was very happy to see about a few years back a train. They showed a documentary train moving from China going to right up to United Kingdom and coming back. There were difficulties in the what you call the railway line being some small gauge and the medium gauge. But the fact is, what China proved was the whole world is connected. It can be connected. It's peacefully. Why should India should stop its objection to the CPAC? The CPAC is improving infrastructure in Pakistan. It's not a threat to what you call India. But if India says it's crossing through dispute neutrality, then what does it show? It shows that India should sit down with Pakistan and resolve this issue of Kashmir. That is the most important thing. And let me just share with you this: the revocation of Article 370. India did something, a disaster, not only in terms of domestic politics, but globally also. What happened was Ladakh was part of the Kashmir kingdom, and India did not realize that China is part and parcel of this dispute. That is the reason this standoff took place. So China should have India should look at the larger canvas of region. I'm happy Professor Swaran Singh was saying something very interesting, and I've been saying as somebody who looks at China-India relations, that yes, Afghanistan can be the moot point. That the food assistance which is going from India to Afghanistan, okay, we welcome it. I don't think there's any problem to that. Let us sit down together and try to see a regional approach, not only to food security, but to health security. Look at what COVID has done. Killed so many people across the border in the region. Why can't we the countries sit down together, focus on this? It is a humanitarian aspect. You see diseases, they don't look at religion. They don't look at any color. They are killing left and right in the whole world. So it's in this region we should look at food security also. People are dying of hunger. So this is very important. China, as far as the rivalry is concerned, I don't agree with one of my participants said. Rivalry will continue between China and India. It can be a peaceful rivalry, trying to two countries competing with each other in the economic field, in the technological field. Let this technology and this thing impact positively on the common man in the region. So it's very, very important. So, but this, and another aspect is there is a concern, especially in Pakistan, if you look at the region, that certain secession elements within our country are being aided by India, and Afghanistan was being used as the launching pad. So this is something, a concern which the Indian should be able to sit down with Pakistan and end that. Because if you are doing these things, how do you not vitiate the atmosphere in the region? We should be at this time focusing on trying to improve the lives of the people, mitigate the difficulties that there isn't because of the COVID and the food security. Instead of vitiating the atmosphere, there is a concern globally of what's happening in Indian occupied Kashmir. So this is something very important, and China is also concerned about it. Let me just share with you, because nobody wants a neighbor who harbors ill will against other countries. So I am looking towards on China and India as two huge countries, huge economies, huge population, and two countries who are marching forward. We will also like to be part and parcel of that. We have nothing against India. I can tell you, the common man in Pakistan, if you look at the election campaigns which taken place in Pakistan, they don't even talk about having a war with India. But unfortunately, all the election campaigns which are taking place in India, the Pakistani, they keep on saying that Pakistan is a threat. I don't understand how Pakistan is a threat. How? Have we put our armies on the border? No, borders are like that. There is no problem except for the Kashmir issue. Pakistan has never raised any issue with India. So we should look at the larger picture of looking at the people, the common man. I don't think the common man, even in India, would like to have a war with Pakistan. We have had the 3.5 wars, I think. What did it bring about? Misery, killing of soldiers both across the border. So I think now I was listening to your army chief of India saying that Sachin is an issue which should be resolved. I think this is something, a very positive sign. Let people across the border sit down together. Let the composite dialogue should be revived, because it will have an impact even on China also. I don't think China would like Pakistan and India to fight a war. I don't think that they have always been encouraging India and Pakistan to sit across the table and talk. No, China would not like its borders to become active. So this is something, and unfortunately, I just want to say, not only India has a problem with China, India has a problem with all its small neighbors. So this is something which unfortunately, China has no problem with any of its neighbors except in India. And even then it was trying to contain, if you look at the Ladakh standoff, was something very positive. Even when this standoff was taking place, the Chinese ambassador in India, right on that day when it started off, was saying that this issue will be contained. And then they sat across the table. The defense, the diplomats sat across the table to contain this standoff. I think this is something very positive. Why can't this be replicated with Pakistan? Why can't the composite dialogue be revived? And let the two countries, again I say, send their, upgrade their representation in both the capitals. And the region will have, will heave a sigh of relief.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shahid. You have raised very important points, and I agree with you that three countries in this region, India, China, and Pakistan, hold the key. So it's very important. So the kind of pragmatism is the prevailing between China and India. So we can hope so this would also prevail in India and Pakistan context as well. So now we move towards the question and answer session. So firstly, before I go to what I have previously asked, I just quickly move to a question raised by Arishullah Khan, research analyst from the Institute of Research Studies. He has written his question in Hindi. So Professor Swaran Singh can understand this kind of a question. So please respond to that question, then we move towards the other question.
Thank you, Imran, and thank you, Mr. Khan, for asking that question in Hindi. I was a bit surprised that you wrote in Hindi script, and I have, of course, answered him on bilateral. But his question basically was regarding this whole narrative about debt trap in China's Belt and Road Initiative. And I think he's asking whether it is only a narrative. First of all, any economic relationship, even the best of economic relationships, would have several question marks, would have several hiccups, would have irritants. And then we are talking of these unusual economic relationships, which are coming like a flood. China is going out, and I said, out of compulsions to find employment for its youth, to find a market for its excessive production, to find investment for its enormous amount of foreign exchange reserves. And that flood definitely is causing, even if you were looking at it purely from perspective of being an economist, several hiccups and irritants. And that is not for me to say, because successively you have seen one after another, whether it is Malaysia or it is even Pakistan. When Imran Khan came to power, he was wanting to relook at several contracts, revise several contracts. And Pakistan is the best example to give in terms of closer relationship with China. Maldives, Sri Lanka, everywhere leaders have raised questions Sometimes they have also cancelled a huge amount of contracts. And you have had protests in the streets, for example, in Sri Lanka. You have had protests in some other countries. So because of this flood of investment of huge turnkey projects, and let me put my neck and say, very often projects which China is good in giving, irrespective of whether the recipient actually needs it or not. And any big project coming is good for any politician to put his name on the project without worrying about its financial commercial viability, without worrying about how the repayments will happen. So whether it is Gwadar, which is now under 43 years of lease to a Chinese company, or it is Hambantota, which is for 99 years of lease. And it reminds me of the lease of Hong Kong that Britain had for 99 years. Or the European powers, when they came and colonized most of us, they were building infrastructure. What were Europeans doing? They were building ports, roads, railways, buildings for our government offices. They were doing all this for connectivity. They said the same thing. They're building connectivity. So there are certain historical baggage that makes many of us, many nations, look at these sudden flood of investments with a certain skepticism, shall we say. And because several of them are proving economically unviable, is why, again, that suspicion gets a little strengthened. And that is why this whole debate about debt trap, because countries that are receiving, for example, Laos is a great example. A single project of a fast railway is creating debt to Laos worth 38% of its GDP. Can you imagine a nation like Laos receiving a project where the debt will be 38% of its own GDP, one project? So there are questions, but I'm not saying that. I started by saying even in best economic relationship, there are questions. In China's Belt and Road Initiative, there are perhaps more than normal questions. There are several serious questions, but I would like to see Professor Han Hua also saying something in this. I'm sure she has the other side of how Chinese look at these issues of protests on the streets or contracts being sort of rescinded and revoked over a period of time. And the question of pricing per unit, even in case of Pakistan, per unit price of electricity was an issue. And Pakistan is a great friend of China. And so it's pure economics, even if you don't look at the politics part of it. But I look forward to Professor Han Hua also saying something.
Mr. Han Hua, please.
Yes, about the question is about the imbalance of trade between China and India. I think there are two levels of issue. The first level is a structural answer to that. Some officials in China, they talk about the imbalance. The reason they think is economic structure caused the imbalance, not the policy perspective. So it seems to me, as a scholar, not official, I think maybe that comes from the question of the positions of both sides in the global supply chain. I think from that side, the two countries have different positions in the supply chain. And also the globalization really gave us some kind of rooms to redesign our positions in that chain. They can give some chance for those for both governments. And also in the policy level, I think in recent years, the Chinese side has already recognized the imbalance has been increased. For example, this year, the surplus for China is $61 billion US. Even this year is a little bit special because of pandemic, the special time. But in overall imbalance, the percentage is always similar, around 15% of the overall trade volume. So China takes advantage in that kind of a relationship. But on the policy level, I think China has already recognized if you really want to continue and increase the trade relationship with India, you have to solve the problem of imbalance. So how? So in recent years, the Chinese two governments, they send delegations to talk about what we can do to copy that challenge. Some people say maybe China should open the market for the Bell pharmacy products from India. And India should open more market for the Chinese communication industry in India. So that's some negotiations going on. And actually, China also sent delegations to India to try to make occasional or individual deals. For example, to have a list of buying stuff, a huge amount of money involved. So that's a second policy level to solve the problem. But I still think both sides agree that the China side has already taken some measures to make a more openness for the Indian market. For example, the Bell pharmacy and also agriculture products and movies, even movies from India. So that's basically the ways for both countries to solve the problem, but still very challenging job.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Arishullah Khan wants to just ask his question verbally because he thinks that his question has been mixed with Sangamitra's question. So, Ahmad, please, can you please allow Mr. Arishullah Khan to just ask his question verbally?
Thank you, Imran. Professor Saab, I had asked you a question about the kind of appetite there is in India in improving bilateral relations with Pakistan, and you also replied to it privately to me that it takes two to tango, and Pakistan not allowing Indian wheat to cross over into Afghanistan is a good case in point. But my response to that was that it seems as if the constituencies for peace in both India and Pakistan at this point in time are limited. And there are fewer and fewer people in both countries, perhaps, talking about trade and peace with each other. So I would like to have your comment on that. And let me also add that Professor Saab has been a long-time mentor since 2005, actually. So thank you for being with us, Professor Saab.
Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Khan, for asking that question to me and reminding me of my old connections with you and also with IRS. I've had long connections. But I agree with that. You heard Ambassador Kiani mentioning there are constituencies on both sides of India and Pakistan who hold each other with enormous affection and understanding. And of course, I understand there was a situation, 2016-18 was a difficult period. And that was now followed by 2 years of pandemic. And I think that has really sidelined every other issue on the table. So focus has been primarily to deal with this immediate catastrophe of pandemic facing the humanity. And India has tried its best. And I take pride by the fact that some people around the world are now calling India as pharmacy of the world. Which means India's focus has been on supplying medicines, vaccines, equipment, materials to deal with this immediate crisis on hand. And given the fact that all of our countries have a limited resources, both human resources, technical and financial resources, it may have put some other issues into deep freezer. But it has been also sometimes I say it's almost cyclical. that there are issues that happen in India-Pakistan relations, and then of course we get angry with each other, we stop talking to each other, then the dialogue comes back again. And indeed, some people in India have found it frustrating, in fact, that every time India says there was a reason to get angry with Pakistan, to stop talking to Pakistan, and then again we start the dialogue. So it's sometimes seen as a reflection of being a soft power, that India doesn't really push a strategy to put an end to that kind of concern that it faces from Pakistan, and repeatedly cycle of dialogue and silence and dialogue and silence continues. So if history of 70 years is telling something, I'm sure sooner or later again some kind of dialogue will begin. But I'm sure more than me, Ambassador Kiani is aware that invariably there are back channels. Even when we are not fully aware of formal dialogues, there are back channels which are in action very often. And so I, as an academic, may not know it, but maybe Ambassador Kiani knows that maybe something already is happening or is likely to happen, and something could be revived. But I think immediate crisis for everybody today is pandemic. And that may be partly the reason why some other issues have not received attention that they should. And in that context, only mentioned that since there is a certain foot in the door kind of an opportunity, where Pakistan and India seem to be coordinating, supplying India's aid to Afghanistan, this could kind of create an inflection point where we could see some kind of positivity returning to the relationship.
Thank you very much. Shahid, Kiani sir, would you like to add something? Or
yes, I would. You know what I would say briefly, that while China and India shall continue to follow different economic and foreign policy paths, I said that the way these two countries came on the world map are quite different, I said. So, and they will follow different economic and foreign policy paths. It is in the nature of states to do so, but they have shown the way. I'll be very honest with you. We look at the way of coexistence to other states of the region. If India becomes, in my opinion, flexible with Pakistan, its second biggest neighbor, another model of coexistence can take roots to the betterment of the people of these two countries who are already battling extreme poverty and malnutrition, the twin challenges that both the states can fight together. The ambition to follow this positive has of recent countries be battered by the standoff. It happened with China and India. So these are things we are looking at it. Professor Singh is very right that behind the scenes, many things happen. They are, in my opinion, the experience is that there has been always a very positive outcome of these behind the scenes looking. Because again, if China and India can show the way of coexistence, as I said, the trade is increasing in spite of this very bloody standoff which took place. Why can't Pakistan and India can work together? But I will say once again, sir, that India has to show the way, a bigger country to a smaller neighbor. We also have the same problem of coexistence. Look at the huge border we have. We have dragged this issue of a Kashmir dispute from the last century to this century. Same thing has happened of the demarcation of border between China and India from the last century to this century. Meaning the world looks at it to these three countries, that to what extent would this enmity of the rivalry will go to? Why can't they sit down together in the larger interest of the people of the region? Because I can tell you, if you ask smaller countries in the region to start taking sides or forced to take sides, yes, sometimes it has happened in the case of India. Where do the smaller countries go? If the smaller country look at towards China as an economic model, China has helped even trying to resolve the border issue with Bhutan, with Sri Lanka or with Maldives. The Indians get apprehensive, but this is a very peaceful, meaning these smaller countries have no other, they do not have any choice. Where would they take the borders to? Means the tyranny of geography is such that these countries will have to coexist and work together. Meaning we are becoming a laughing stock, honestly speaking, globally. They are looking at it, at what are the issues? Why can't these people sit down across the table and discuss it? This is very, very important. The issue of coexistence should start working on the leadership of these three countries and work out a modus vivendi in which the common man is what you call benefits from this exercise.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a question for Dr. Hanhua and Professor Swaran Singh together can respond to that question. And this question is from Nabila Jaffer, who is a research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies, and she is running a China program. And first of all, she is thanking both the speakers for a very positive tone of the discussion. So the question is, China and India trade is increasing year on yearly basis. How much is the scope of cultivating cultural ties between India and China? This is the first part of the question, and the second is to what extent India can neutralize its position on China's legitimate interest in South Asia. So first, I just ask Dr. Hanhua to respond to that question. You're not audible. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. As a professor on the campus of Peking University, I experienced some exchange programs between these two countries. For example, the Indian embassy in Beijing unleashed some program, especially we talk about yoga, the exercise yoga together, and also some remembering day of Mahatma Gandhi, or other kind of cultural activities are going on, even in the midst of some tensions along the border. Even maybe in recent years it stopped because of the pandemic, but I really involved some of those activities. I feel like the environment has already created for the more cultural exchange, and particularly the movie, the Bollywood movies already shown in the theaters in Beijing, and also not only in Beijing, in other cities as well. And the Han, the three kinds, the very prominent actors actually are very popular in China, especially the Amir Khan. He is kind of icon of the movie, really have some fans in China. And he has come to China several times, and very well received by the Chinese. So that's only part of the answers to the cultural exchange. But actually, I would like to point out, actually, in recent months, when I taught in my classroom about the culture of South Asia as a whole, I more realized that actually the civilization, Indo civilization, is coming out of the whole region rather than only India. It's really a topic we discuss quite a lot, especially when they visit some museums in Pakistan. They realize how the splendid culture at ancient times. And I would also like to invite some experts and some culture experts, for example, come to Beijing and on the campus as well. They can really have a more cultural exchange, not only between China, India, and also China and Pakistan.
Over to you, Professor Sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nabila Jaffer, for your questions. I fully agree with Professor Hanhua the three Khans of Indian Bollywood film industry are really very popular in China now. April 2019, President Xi Jinping had convened a dialogue of Asian civilizations in which I was one of the delegates from India. And Amir Khan was another delegate from India, and I could personally vouch the kind of craze that his presence has in China is amazing to see. And that sometimes reminds me of India-Pakistan, when people meet, the kind of warmth you notice among common people. That kind of affection towards the Indian film industry is unusual. And that is becoming a very important component of cultural connect. In fact, originally Afghanistan, and then of course, because of tensions in Afghanistan, Pakistan was the big market for Indian film industry. Now it is China. In fact, the biggest grossers of many films are not more than money they make in India, they make sometimes more money in China. There are examples like that. So film industry, I think, can be a great connect. We need to exploit it more. Maybe India produces almost 700 films every year. So that should become a very important source of linking in understanding each other. Chinese will develop perhaps an interesting understanding of India. Sometimes in commercial films also throw up very strange kind of imaginations of each other, but nevertheless a good way to connect with each other in terms of common life on both sides. Buddhism is another. Prince Siddharth was born in Nepal, and then he became Buddha in India. And Buddhism as a religion was born in India. Today, the world's largest Buddhist country with 300 million plus people as Buddhists is China. Incidentally, China is pursuing the World Buddhism Forum different from India pursuing its own World Buddhism Forum. Maybe that needs to also connect with each other. And in that sense, I think cultural connect is really there for enormous potential, but perhaps we need to calibrate, coordinate better, and use that much more often than we are using so far. We are also 1+ billion people on both sides. So people to people connect, not just in traveling to each other's countries, but meeting each other in other parts of the world. All Western universities now, business schools, tech schools are full of Indian and Chinese students. So diaspora connect, I think, is another interesting way of looking at cultural connect between China and India. I forgot Nabila's other question, and if you can remind me the second question, I'll be quickly able to answer that.
The second part of this question is about how India can utilize its position on China's legitimate interest in South Asia.
Excellent. I think it's the most difficult challenge here would be what both China and India consider as each other's quote unquote legitimate interests. And the narratives are not very often identical to each other, what each side sees as others' legitimate interests. What I am more sure is that whatever those legitimate interests be, when it comes to South Asia, unless China is able to work together with India, and I'm not boasting, I'm just being an academic when I objectively try to look at the reality, China's interest in South Asia will not be able to deliver, materialize, succeed, unless it works along with India. And as far as it works away from India, skirts India, avoids India, worst case works against India, it can push that as much as it wants to. For example, again, the example would be the best relationship China has in South Asia is with Pakistan. The promised contract value of CPEC is, I'm told, now reached about 65 billion. On the ground is less than 8 billion. Why it is so? Why it is that Hambantota port is not successful, but Colombo port is a successful case where 70% of cargo is meant for India. So Colombo is successful, Hambantota is not successful, Gwadar is not successful. Why it is that your best friend China creates a historic, unprecedented example of requesting a recipient country called Pakistan to raise 15,000 troops to protect Chinese investments and Chinese in Pakistan, the best friend of China. So I want to underline how it is important, therefore, that in South Asia, given India's size, stature, presence, and the tyranny of geography, as Ambassador Kiani repeatedly mentions, whatever those genuine interests be, cannot materialize unless there is a kind of a synergy between India and China. And then that will greatly facilitate China moving forward and delivering on the ground.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Professor Sir. I just want to frankly ask if you are comfortable, we can take 2 or 3 more questions, or I just wind it up. It's been 2 hours. Okay. Dr. Anqua, are you comfortable? Can you take more questions? If you're comfortable, we can take 2, 3 more questions.
I just read a question coming from the audience talking about why the border clash has been more frequently happened than before since 2016. 2016, yeah. I think in China, there's a saying that after Moody took power, the Indians' foreign policy has been performed more assertiveness than before, especially because the border clash or the blame game between these 2 countries, talking about the intrusions from both sides, has not been a new phenomenon, but is a quite long story. But after the 2016, the clashes, not only the number has increased, but also the density is also increased. I think one reason, especially among the Chinese analysts, they think the domestic politics plays a role in India. I mean, Moody as a strong leader, and he has already shown his assertiveness against the Chinese invasion, so that really can gain some popularity among Indians. That's one answer. But some others also talk about the pivot to Asia, policy or strategy under Obama administration later on, continuously with the Trump administration. So rebalancing strategy plus Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy really make the China's border, not only India, but also with other countries inside the country or along the border, are all more not that stable as before. So that's some common reasoning among the Chinese side. But I know some people must say it's a Chinese quite a biased I mean argument, but that is something, I mean, from the Chinese perspective. Of course, some people talk about the local military or general leadership in China in different scenarios, different occasions, but that's our some Chinese interpretations.
Thank you. I just want to ask a question which is very relevant to Professor Swaran Singh and Dr. Henqua's subject of arms control and disarmament. But I would like to begin from Shahid Kiani Sahab. If you please respond to a question that is don't you think that the assertive behavior of both China and India that we are witnessing in nowadays would fuel the arms race in this region, and also the bipolarity in this region? Or you think it is just this assertiveness is just a new normal between India and China relations? What is your take on this?
As I said, thank you very much. As I said very earlier, that the rivalry is natural. I do not agree with people when they say that there is no rivalry. Rivalry is there, is natural, and it will continue. But what we should be praying here is, would this rivalry be peaceful, economic, technological, even political? There is no problem in that, on the multilateral forum also. But at the same time, if you look at what China has done in the last, India is member of SCO. India is member of the international bank, which the Chinese have created a few years back. Where you can get you can borrow money at lesser price than the market. These are very, very important things. But yes, it's a matter of serious concern if Chinese and Indian rivalries, as I said, military in the defense realm, increases. But to be fair, China has not, asked any other country in the region or outside the region to come and to become a bulwark and other countries. But India is doing, as I said, Quad is there. United States very openly, overtly assisting India in trying to contain China. These are counterproductive measures. Why should India, is such a huge country with huge armed forces, be threatened by whom? Why can't, as I said earlier, if you want to put an end to this rivalry, sit across the table with China and demarcate the boundary? This is a very serious issue in this region. Why are you looking towards the United States to come and assist you? Are you so weak? This is something which is a question in the minds of the strategists in this region. They are unable to understand. India should try to, stay away from these defense or, defense-oriented organization, institution in which you try to create, serious concern within the power blocks of China. This is something very important. So we should be looking towards peaceful coexistence in this part of the world instead of creating, the hypes after every now and then. So, as I said, body demarcation, China and India, the resolution of the Kashmir dispute between Pakistan and India, but believe it or not, would be welcomed by people in the region. And then the march towards peaceful coexistence in improving the lives of the people of the region.
Professor Swaran Singh, armed race, assertiveness, armed race, and bipolarity in the region. What is your take on this?
I think things are all intertwined. It's not easy to, see separate issues in separate boxes. They influence, each issue influences the other issue. For example, we have been speaking about how India is expanding economic relationship with China, how China is the largest trading partner of India. On that issue, we have no questions. But when India is expanding relationship with the United States, then it becomes an issue. India is expanding relationship with everybody. The best example will be Middle East or West Asia. India today is a friend of Palestine, also Israel, also UAE, also Iran, also Saudi Arabia. It's unusual. So India is fundamentally trying to build partnership with as many countries as possible in as many issues as possible. So India is close to Russia, which some Americans don't like. India is also constantly in touch with China in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in Russia-China-India Triangle, in so many other forums, which Americans don't like. India is part of quadrilateral security framework, which I'm sure China doesn't like. So there are going to be issues when India engages in different platforms and India does different things. One country's happiness may cause other countries' unhappiness. But I would request us to look at how balanced the calibration has been. Just look at the speeches when four foreign ministers of Quad meet. Just read their speeches. You will find a complete variation between how Mike Pompeo used to speak and how Indian Foreign Minister used to speak. India has constantly been saying India would not like to see Indo-Pacific militarized, Indo-Pacific becoming exclusive club of few countries. In fact, India's insistence led to China-India maritime dialogue putting this item on agenda that we need to discuss Indo-Pacific also. And India has been publicly saying we would like Russia, China to be part of these narratives in Indo-Pacific, which Americans don't like. America was not willing to, sort of allow either Russia or China to become part of these narratives. So when India stood its ground and said we will not like to see this region militarized, Quad could not get a military arm. What is Quad working on? Critical technologies, climate change, and pandemics. It's not. They had to create a separate mechanism called AUKUS, America, US, UK, to focus on the security deployment of submarines. Because members in Quad were not agreeable to that kind of initiative. And Quad is doing today very different things. Quad is not trying to be, as some people love to say, Asian NATO, starting a new Cold War. I'm reminded of Wang Yi saying this. 3 years back, he said this is a sea foam, and now last year he's saying it's starting a new Cold War. So there are perceptions, and I understand those perceptions that come out of our baggages. All of us have our baggages. But I would not like to leave this discussion with this impression being created that India is choosing sides. In fact, India is making sure it doesn't have to choose sides. So it is definitely expanding relationship in sectors where it can with the United States. But it's not dancing to the tune of United States. In fact, many Americans are so upset with India because India is not dancing to their tune. India is continuously doing things that follow India's national interests. So India's engagement with, for example, Afghanistan issue, Americans are still so upset with Taliban. They still have put sanctions, all kinds of limitations on Taliban, but India is trying to be the first to go and supply humanitarian aid there. So basically, each country is trying to follow their own national interests, and sometimes they vary. Pakistan's national interest is not going to be ditto identical to India's national interest. So we have to find some kind of median mode, which is what Ambassador Kiani, people like him in diplomacy do. They spend their lifetime doing this, finding a kind of a median mode in multiple varying national interests. And in that sense, it's simply just like rise of China has led China to become, visible and active in so many countries around the world. So will India's rise. India, when it becomes a little more capable, would also start engaging many more countries. And that will, of course, create certain discomfort in some other countries, which is bound to happen. So in that sense, I think each country has to look at how they can engage with India, or how India can engage with each of these countries. And South Asia is the immediate region for India. And that is the most important region. Neighborhood first policy of Prime Minister Modi, whose name has come up in discussion repeatedly, is a very important component of his focus on neighborhood. His first visit was to neighborhood. Where are he traveling maximum? To Bhutan, to Bangladesh, to Sri Lanka, to Nepal. No Indian Prime Minister has traveled so much in neighborhood. He went uninvited on Christmas, you remember? He had a sudden landing in Lahore to meet Nawaz Sharif. No Indian Prime Minister has done that kind of gesture, suddenly going there uninvited and saying, can I come and join your grandchild's wedding and wish you happy birthday? So it's a balance. I think there are multiple things each leader, each country does. And I think one has to look in terms of balance, not pick and choose certain issues that, want to build your anti-Indian narrative. That's not useful. Particularly as academics, we should look at the whole range of things that are happening and look at what is the overall picture telling us. And overall picture is telling us that India is far more seriously engaged in global affairs now, including in immediate neighborhood than it was before. Definitely, India may not be able to compete with China in many sectors. China's GDP is much bigger. China's trade is much bigger. China's deep pockets, foreign exchange reserves are much bigger. But shall we also confine only international relations to economic relations? I don't think so. There are other components of relationships. Again, if you look at the overarching picture of multiple components of foreign policy of each of the countries, you will find that the gap between India and China is not as much as if you confine it only to investments. India has different ways of engaging the world, different advantage points, perhaps greater trust. The world has much greater trust on India than on China. I hope I'm not being very harsh when I say that. But that's true because China's unprecedented sudden rise has made the world so much suspicious of China. Now, China is seen as a rival power to United States. United States has written documents now. Its Indo-Pacific strategy says that China is trying to displace United States from Indo-Pacific region. Nobody says that about India. No countries around the world feel that India is going to displace them from any place that they are in. So China has its own challenges, China has its own advantages, India has our own strengths and weaknesses. And trying to be as balanced and objective is what we are trying, so that we try to not unnecessarily damage relationships and try to maximize the benefits from each other. And that is where I think the whole focus of discussion is, that China-India's equations must be much better, their communications must be active, so that they can have a positive impact on immediate region of India called South Asia, rather than skepticism and trust deficit leading to negative outcomes. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to talk to your audience as much as you wish. In South Asia, we are normally notorious to be being talkative, so we love talking as much as possible. And professors are worst at it. I mean, we love talking endlessly. But thank you so much for making me part of discussion.
Yeah, rightly said. Dr. Henhua, your last words on these questions of armed lives.
It seems to me the strongman has his own merit. Strongman does not necessarily mean he has to be assertive to his neighbor. Maybe a strongman can make a decisive decision in times of national needs, according to the national needs. For example, I take example of Deng Xiaoping, the prominent leader in several decades ago. He made a decision that disarmament, because he made a conviction that at that time the World War could not happen. The possibility is so low. So China should decrease their military budget and pay priority or policy priority on economic development. So military sacrifice for a decade. That is assertive for strongman also means another aspect. As for the issue of arms race so far, I think it's a tragic, really. When Trump made the national strategic report in the US, talking about the age has already changed into the computation of great rivalry. That's really make the arms race among the big powers more relevant, more an issue for the countries. If you are not how to say that depends on the security environment you preserved, perceived among the decision makers, of course. But arms race is tragic among the great powers for sometimes if they think security environments are not very friendly as before, they have to engage in some arms race. Otherwise, arms race itself does not mean war. Maybe determine, strategic deterrence rather than willingness to engage in a war with other countries. But let me say that high arms race cannot be sustainable as long as your economy can provide it. The military expenditure has to have a very proper ratio with your economic strength. Otherwise, if you pay too much money on the military equipment or personnel, you have to sacrifice your economy, maybe. That's what we learned from the Cold War era. So for China, I think we have to prevent that from happening again. So that is a kind of a decision we have to make in front of the threat you perceive, perceive. But at the same time, you have to make your economy strong enough to sustain your supporting your military expenditure. Otherwise, it's not take long. And especially when you want to be stronger economically and militarily, it's not possible if you really overspend money into the arms race. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to speak to all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now I am concluding this session. So for me, what I have inferred from the panelists that the relationship, the triangular relationship, India, China, and Pakistan is very complex. Whenever there is tension either between India or Pakistan or between China and India, the triangular relationship loses its balance. So, and also these three major countries have also holding the key to the peace of in this region. So, but we have to. There is a lot of positive energy that I can see here after your discussion. I can say there is a lot of hopes is there, but we need to have to take care of the spoilers. Even the spoilers have their made way into this webinar. So this kind of we have to take care the a lot of negativity, the propaganda, and all those things. We have to take extra care of those elements while engaging with each other. So with that, I really thank you, all the participants, for their patience, and thank you, Shahid Kiani Saab, for your valuable inputs on this subject. Thank you, Professor Swaran Singh Saab, for your valuable and very insightful discussion. And thank you, Dr. Hanqua, for joining us. And I just announced here, we will continue this kind of a discussion maybe in the next month or in March. Again, we will invite you again for a discussion to this next webinar. So with that, take good care. Allah Hafiz and Sheshe, Namaste, and Allah Hafiz.
Thank you.